Coming up today on the UW Medicine Pulse podcast, we look at some of the fascinating medical research that's going on in South Lake Union.
This is kind of welcome home for UW Medicine coming down here.
We'll meet a husband and wife research team who have developed an exciting new theory that may help prevent nearsightedness.
So the treatment is special glasses. These glasses are exactly the orthodontia for vision.
And we'll even respond to a rhetorical question comedian Chris Rock once asked, half jokingly, we think, in a stand-up comedy routine.
What's the last the doctor cured? Polio. You know how long ago polio was?
This is the UW Medicine Pulse with Marty Reamer. Real-world stories of the discoveries being made at UW Medicine and the impact they're having on people here in the Pacific Northwest and around the world.
For the past few years, the South Lake Union neighborhood in Seattle has been experiencing a renaissance. No, strike that. A complete makeover. Countless construction cranes and tons of heavy machinery have converted this once forgotten chunk of real estate between downtown and Lake Union into a new home for Amazon.com, countless new hipster restaurants, and as it turns out, the city's new crucible for medical research. South Lake Union, it's become this unusual mix of science and creativity, or maybe that's not such an unusual combination after all.
Science is very creative. Science is all about, discovering nature. And in order to make that discovery, you have to take a look and conjecture as to what you think it is. And then you do an experiment, and you do get those ahas. The first brilliant flash of insight that shows you what nature is, in our case, generally biology, really knocks your socks off.
Dr. John Slattery heads up UW Medicine's Office of Research and Graduate Education. He oversees a complex of buildings in South Lake Union that represents UW Medicine's research efforts in this burgeoning part of town.
There are people doing kind of the big frontiers of work is really kind of in immunology and autoimmune diseases. There are others as well. So we have people that are working on things like systemic lupus erythematosus, SLE, rheumatoid arthritis, and a variety of diseases. We have a big effort down here in transplantation of cells grown differentiated from stem cells. And actually here we have our entire basic science department of immunology moving down here into an environment that's very applied in terms of looking at actual diseases. And so that kind of synergy, again, that we find both in the area down here, but then actually on this 2-block site is the sort of scientific themes that we're really trying to develop.
The newest addition to this 2-block site is a modern mid-rise building called Phase 3, which opened this year and houses, among other disciplines, a new world-class vision sciences center, where the goal is to discover next-generation tools for diagnosing, preventing, and treating all manner of eye disease.
That's used for doing all sorts of experiments.
Vision science is one that's really fun to talk about because of the neat work that this group has done. I mean, some is in artificial cornea, some is in instrumenting contacts so that they could read out your eye pressure and things like that.
Some of the other critical work they're engaged in involves stem cell regeneration of the retina. There are studies involving zebrafish that aim to explain how retinal cells develop in the first place. There are researchers that are studying DNA sequencing in bacteria that impact the eye because right now only about 10% of bacterial infections in the eye are understood. And then there's the study of colorblindness.
And so this is also just getting set up, but here, this is that back there. Maureen is trained as a molecular geneticist, and I'm a physiologist and also do vision testing and visual behavior. And so we're able to start at the genes and do every step of kind of studying the visual system from there to ultimately what people see. We've had first great success understanding what causes color blindness. And once you understand what causes it, then the next step is maybe we could figure out better ways to diagnose it and understand it. And so we have developed a number of different diagnostic procedures. And we're the inventors of the most widely sold color vision test in the United States. And now recently we have developed a genetic test for color blindness.
Let's see if we can get the Neitz to break this down for us.
I'm sorry, but all questions must be submitted in writing.
First, to try and understand color blindness, one's inclined to ask, how does a colorblind person perceive the world? Is it like an old episode of Dragnet where the whole thing's in black and white?
Police officers, this is Bill Gannon. My name's Friday.
Or is it more like one of the earliest color television sets where if you're old enough, you'll remember the color was there, it just wasn't always in the right place. The grass was oftentimes blue and the sky was green.
Actually, what it means is that you do not have a sensation of either red or green. Those things don't exist to you.
But Maureen Neitz, aren't there various forms of color blindness?
Yes, there are other types, but we always mean red-green. And when we say color blindness, we mean a specific subset of people that have a red-green color vision defect, and those are the people that are most severe. They are the people that are truly blind to colors that other people can see, and that constitutes about 2% of males.
And yes, color blindness is much more common in men, but there are women with the condition as well.
Right now, all I see is 3 colors. I see usually yellow, blue, and green sometimes, but either 2 colors, yellow and blue, and if I'm lucky, I'll see a 3rd one.
Zoe Mestre is a University of Washington psychology student and also one of the Neitz subjects, who has one of the most severe forms of color blindness. My producer Tina and I sat down with Zoe on the University of Washington campus recently. At the time, Tina was wearing a very loud, colorful red and green floral patterned blouse. And I asked Zoe what colors she saw in the shirt.
I'd say white with some green.
So you don't even detect flowers in that top when you first look at it?
No, I see foliage.
Fascinating, fascinating.
So not being able to detect certain colors poses some obvious obstacles when driving, for instance, in which case Zoe told us that she's found some workarounds.
I drive more cognitively than, because for example, instead of looking at the lights, the stop lights on cars, I'll just look at the distance between me and other cars to know they're stopping. And if I have a red light, most of the time I won't see it, so I'll see if who's going in which direction to know which one it is, or if it's off, I assume it's red.
Last summer, Zoe encountered a circumstance where her color blindness, her inability to register the color red, led to a scary situation where she was unable to compensate.
When my boyfriend got stung by a spider and he had an allergic reaction from it, and he turned completely red, but I couldn't see it. And so my mom had to be the one to tell me there was something wrong, and then we went to the emergency room. But it was kind of shocking because I couldn't see he had a reaction. He looked completely normal to me.
The reason that we did the experiments to treat color blindness is partially just as a cognitive neuroscience experiment. We want to know if you could make a change at the level of the eye that ultimately would make a change in the way that people see. And so that was one of the things we wanted to find out. And this color blindness model is done in monkeys that have color blindness exactly like humans do. And so Maureen selected monkeys by doing a blood test and looking at their DNA that are missing the gene that encodes the red photopigment. And we were able to replace that photopigment using gene therapy and give them 3 different kinds of cones in their eye. And the question was, does this give them a whole new dimension of vision? And the amazing thing is it did. The eye of the monkey, the defect, everything is exactly the same as humans, but there are different standards about, what risk, a procedure could have in humans. So what we're working now is to make the risk for doing the treatment so that it would be 0 and it would be completely safe to do in people.
But if, like Zoe, a person has been colorblind since birth, what would that be like to suddenly switch on the reds, to highlight an end of the color spectrum that previously had been blended away in grays? Wouldn't that be unsettling? That's a question the Neitz are asking as well.
It's been fun to ask her, if we could make the procedure 100% safe, would you have your color vision corrected?
For me, I'd have to make sure first that it was really giving me full vision and not just some other kind of vision. But if it were to give me full vision, I think I would opt for that option just because of what happened this summer.
I grew up and my father didn't believe in television, so we had one small black and white TV in the house. And when I was really small, Wizard of Oz would play every year. There was a part of that scene where the person said, "Now that's a horse of a different color." And I watched that scene. I bet you I've seen that 10 times, and I had no idea what they were talking about because I didn't ever know that there was this thing where eventually it goes from black and white to color.
What kind of a horse is that? I've never seen a horse like that before.
No, and never will again, I fancy. There's only one of him, and he's it. He's the horse of a different colour you've heard tell about. And a couple of...
Color is so pleasing to us. It's hard for me to believe that it wouldn't be a little bit like that, ultimately, that someone would say, wow. Now that's a horse of a different color.
And a couple of tra-la-las. That's how we laugh a day away in the merry old land of Oz.
About 7% of the population, as we mentioned, mostly men, exhibit colorblindness, much less common in our population than nearsightedness. It's estimated that roughly 1/3 of all adults in the U.S. are nearsighted or myopic, myself included, very much so, I'll admit. In some parts of East Asia, the numbers are much, much, much higher. Close to 90% of the East Asian population has some degree of nearsightedness. So while a possible cure for colorblindness would be exciting and certainly have a positive impact on millions of lives, a cure for myopia would be truly revolutionary. Well, it was while working on developing their genetic test for colorblindness that the Neitz made another discovery that, if I may say, shifted their focus.
Along the way, we discovered that a gene mutation that is in the same cone photoreceptors that respond for color blindness causes myopia. And this has opened a whole new way of looking at myopia.
And I would say we want to make something really clear. Defects in the same genes that are responsible for myopia and color blindness, but color blindness is not a requisite part of myopia.
People used to think, oh, myopia is really a problem with the optics, which of course it is, but it turns out that in order to get your eye to work correctly and not have myopia, that is a developmental process where your eye grows longer and longer until ultimately it gets to the proper length to match the optics. And in order to regulate that growth, it's using information that comes through the photoreceptors to know when the image is in perfect focus. And if you get a mutation in the photoreceptors that interfere with that signal, then the eye doesn't know when to stop and it grows too long and people get myopia.
But even though they discovered a direct genetic cause for nearsightedness, the Neitz were inclined to believe there was something else at play here, some combination of genetics and environment, which led them to take an excursion to a remote Argentinian village. Jay Neitz explains.
It's been known for a long time that there's a huge genetic component to being nearsighted. So the best predictor of being nearsighted is to have two parents that are nearsighted. So we know there's a big genetic component. But in the last 30 years, the number of people that are nearsighted has grown enormously. In the United States, the number of people that are nearsighted is about doubled. And in some other countries, in Japan, that 30 or 40 years ago, maybe 25 to 30% of kids graduating from high school were nearsighted, and now 90%. Well, you can't change the genes of an entire population in 30 years, so we know that it has something to do with the environment. There's something about the modern world, and what if we could go to some place where the genetic component would be similar, like to Asia, but that people wouldn't live in a world that was modern at all? We found out about a group of people that live in a very remote place in Argentina. These people lived undisturbed until about the 1930s. And since then, there's been some contact with the outside world, and there have been missionaries that have gone there. But still, many of these people live in an environment where there is no electricity. There's nothing modern at all about their world. But they're not of European descent. They're Aboriginal people that would have migrated to South America from Asia. So in many ways, they share genetics with the people on Earth that we know that have the highest incidence of myopia. But if you wanted to find two environments, take Tokyo and someplace along the side of a river where there's no modern conveniences at all, and you now have a huge difference in environment. So the idea was to go there and see if these people have nearsightedness. And the short answer is they don't. And so that tells us that there's this huge environmental component. And that's why it makes it so promising that there can be a treatment, because basically all we have to do in order to prevent myopia is change what people see so it's much more like what those people in Argentina are seeing.
See the world like an Argentinian tribe sees the world. So that's how we prevent nearsightedness, huh? How exactly do we accomplish that?
So the treatment is special glasses. These glasses are exactly the orthodontia for vision. At least our plan is that they would start wearing them before they become nearsighted, unlike now where people begin to wear glasses after they're nearsighted. But these glasses change the information that's reaching the eye that doesn't cause the eye to grow too long. And ultimately, once you get through adolescence, your eye stops being able to grow longer, and it would be locked into place, and then people could throw away their glasses, and at least that's the idea.
And the idea is also to have a genetic test so that we can identify people who are at risk for becoming myopic before their eye grows too long.
So what does this mean for you? Well, certainly if you're colorblind or nearsighted, or if you have younger kids who are genetically predisposed to nearsightedness, a possible cure would mean a great deal. But in a broader sense, the research being conducted in the new UW Medicine Phase 3 building in South Lake Union on infectious disease, immunology, rheumatology, kidney research, and vision sciences, that's the kind of work you want a medical organization focused on, pushing the frontiers of medicine to gain a better understanding, to find more effective treatments and cures, to keep asking questions. All of this focused curiosity, this dedication to discovery, ultimately leading to better patient care. You know, all this talk about medical research reminds me of a comedy routine from Chris Rock, where he once lamented the dearth of medical breakthroughs in the last couple of decades.
Same disease has been hanging out since I was a kid, man. What's the last the doctor cured? Polio. You know how long ago polio was? That's like the first season of Lucy.
Really? No worthwhile medical discoveries since polio? I took that charge to Dr. John Slattery, who we met earlier in the program, who heads up UW Medicine's Office of Research and Graduate Education, and asked him if Chris Rock has a point about the polio.
When you talk about cures, you know, that was a vaccine, but go from the time, just from the development of the AIDS epidemic that really began to be understood in the 80s, and about, 85 or so, you had a virus that was discovered. It happened to be a retrovirus. There were no retroviruses that were actually affecting human health that were known at the time. Then now we have AIDS that's much less the terror that it was, although still a nasty disease, that is treatable, and people live a long time with that disease now. So is that cured? No, but you can certainly knock it down. Even when Franklin Roosevelt died of a massive heart attack, one of the things that they didn't do at that time in the early 40s was just check somebody's blood pressure. This isn't that far down the road, and things are a lot different. So there have been just an enormous series of discoveries and inventions that lead to new therapeutic agents. Of Chris does well on a lot of things, but he's a little bit behind on the medical literature.
He was off on that one.
Thank you, Dr. Slattery. Thanks to all of our guests, Jay and Maureen Neitz, and also Zoe Mestre. This happens to be the inaugural episode of the UW Medicine Pulse podcast. We encourage you to subscribe via iTunes so you get every episode as soon as they're released. And if you'd like to know more about this topic or future podcast topics, visit our online home at uwmedicine.org/pulse. We'd also love to hear from you, questions, comments. You can submit those through that site as well. The UW Medicine Pulse podcast is produced by Tina Knoll, engineered by Shelley Goncharowski. My name's Marty Reamer. Thanks for listening.